Hello, I'm Tom Frimbo from USP, Universidade de São Paulo, and I'll be talking about Do Nheengatu. So this is a case of contact between Do, a Naduhup language, and Nheengatu, a Tupi-Guarani language. Nheengatu is also spoken natively by one other Naduhup people, the Naduhup. And for the Do, this is a big contrast between the under 50s who don't speak Nheengatu at all, other than a few very basic phrases that are known in the region. Good morning, good night, how are you? And the over 50s who are fluent Nheengatu speakers. Now, this really is to do with the changes in demography that have occurred since the 1970s, which had a large change in the number of monolingual Portuguese speakers in the Upper Rio Negro, where this contact has gone on, where this study has gone on. And it really marks the change between the moment when Nheengatu was the lingua franca of the region and Portuguese becoming the lingua franca. So this is the region that we're talking about, 3 large families in the Upper Rio Negro, Arawak languages, Tucanoan languages, Eastern Tucanoan branch, and Yanomami. There are also some smaller families, and the one that we're particularly interested in is the Naduhup family, which has 4 languages in it. So the Do live in this region here, close to São Gabriel da Cachoeira, the Naduhup further south, and the Yuhup and Hup peoples live in the Valpes region. So here they're in close contact with mostly Nheengatu speakers. There are also other indigenous groups there, mostly because of migration from the larger tributaries. So looking more detailedly, we can see that historically the Do have moved steadily northwards from the region where they were originally located. So it's probably because of conflict with Naduhup peoples. And then as they moved north, they came into contact with the colonial society, and they started to interact with Bares and with Brazilian populations. And they were effectively enslaved as debt peon workers in extractivist industries from forest products. And now the region where they occupy is the small green circle just the other side of São Gabriel da Cachoeira, SGC, which goes basically from Waruá down to the Rio Curicuriari. So extralinguistically, it's a small community, about 150 people, just under. They all live more or less in Waruá. This is on the left bank of the Rio Negro as you go up, on the right bank as you go down, and it's in the northwest of Brazil, on the frontier with Colombia and Venezuela. Waruá was founded by Baptist missionaries in the 1980s, and they gathered together the very widely dispersed Do family units, and really created a transformation of the Do society. Now they ended the problems of alcoholism, and they ended the debt slavery that the Do have been subjected to for decades. And so actually, although it's inherently threatened because it's a very small community, the language vitality is very good. All Do children are fluent speakers of Do. All community internal interaction is carried out in Do. There's an indigenous primary school that functions in the community, where the children study in Do and study aspects of Do culture. And also children who come into the community also, who are adopted, or whose families move into the community, they also acquire Do. So the short-term history prospects seem quite good. Nheengatu, on the other hand, is a very widespread language, historically at least, rather than Do being very focused and small. Yeah, so it's the major surviving variety of the Língua Geral Amazônica, which was a Tupi-Guarani-based lingua franca that was spoken throughout the Brazilian Amazon, really up until the end of the 19th century, as in Amazonas state at least, the most widely spoken language. It was more widely spoken than Portuguese. It's pretty well documented for an indigenous, South American indigenous language, because it was used by the missionaries when they converted indigenous populations, and also until the mid 18th century with the reforms of Marquês de Pombal, the language was banned from official use, but prior to that it had been supported by the Portuguese crown. So there are also communities in Venezuela and Colombia. There are some other ancestral communities of speakers scattered around the middle Amazon, and there's several revitalization programs that are going on in Amazonia and also outside of Amazonia that use Nheengatu. So if we have a very brief linguistic overview of Daw, it's a language which basically is monomorphemic, monosyllabic roots. It's tonal, it's isolating, it has an analytic morphology. When it has suffixes, they're purely suffixal, and they're always in a VC structure. Has very productive use of tones, two tones, to carry out grammatical functions, for moving between grammatical categories, for instance, active stative, SVO and postpositions with two structures different for object and subject focus, very flexible transmission between lexical and grammatical roots, as I said, often using a change of tone, and extensive compounding and serial verbs in very complex interactions to express a number of different meanings and structures. So Nheengatu, on the other hand, it really is very much still very clearly a Tupi-Guarani language. It retains most of the Tupi-Guarani, major Tupi-Guarani features, although it has gone, it lost some elements of Tupi-Guarani derivational and some changes in the way that pronouns are used. But mostly that's still very clearly Tupi-Guarani, and that's quite strange in that context because there have never been any Tupi-Guarani peoples in the Upper Rio Negro. That's a language which has come with Luso-Brazilian colonization. Now, it's been widely known that the Daw speak Nheengatu, and they have done for a long time. And this is a comment from Martins 1994, referring to a period about a decade before, really, when she started to work amongst the Daw in the Upper Rio Negro. And here we have a comment from Jair Marques Araújo. He's the oldest man from Arawak. He's the only man over 60 years of age. Really just commenting on the fact that Nheengatu was omnipresent when he was a child. Now it was spoken by his parents, it was spoken by his grandparents, and so he had a very close relationship with the Nheengatu language. If we look at the phonology of the two languages, you can see Daw has a much richer inventory than Nheengatu. So on the whole, when the Daw are speaking Nheengatu, if you take into consideration as well the allophonic variation that's in the phonological system, there is really very little of the major phonological features that cause difficulty for Daw when they speak Nheengatu. That said, there are a few cases where there are features that can be noted. So palatalization of or changing the alveolar tap into the lateral, which is the only feature in each one of the two languages. The Daw has lateral, Nheengatu has a tap. No transference in the velar plosive. Unlike some Portuguese loans into Daw, the case of lowering of U is actually something that goes on in Nheengatu as well to a certain extent. So it may just be a reflex of the way that Nheengatu speakers vary. And the vowel apheresis is very clearly related to the CVC structure of Daw syllables. So that's an influence from the phonology of the first language. In morphosyntax, there are issues relating to phonetic factors and grammatical factors with the possessive and inactive forms in Nheengatu because of the free variation between sh and s. You end up getting the first person pronoun in Nheengatu appearing as se sometimes, which makes it identical to the possessive or inactive prefix, or hypercorrection with sepiripana instead of she apiripana. And grammatically, Daw doesn't have distinct possessive or inactive pronouns or indices, unlike the Guarani languages, which do make a grammatical distinction between the two forms. So you find that the Daw will use uniformly yade for first person plural, whether it's active or inactive. This is different from the way that the two forms are used by Bare speakers, for example. Yeah. Another feature is differential object marking. So Nheengatu occasionally uses it as se, but generally you don't need to have any kind of marker for the object. It's just post-verbal. In Nheengatu, however, when it's spoken by the Daw, we find the postposition arama or ara that appears to mark objects. And this also appears in the Daw's Portuguese because they use para for this, and in terms of the semantics of the postposition, arama and para are very similar. So we can see that both these features are present in their Nheengatu and in their Portuguese. And we can relate this as a transferral. It's a suffix in Daw, which marks direct objects and indirect objects, and this is clearly being transferred into any second language that the Daw are using. And so to conclude, despite the phonetic and phonological proximity and these morphosyntactic parallels that we see, the Daw really seem to be speaking a sub-variety of Rio Negro Nheengatu, basically Bare Nheengatu. And they are fluent speakers, these elders. So Martin said that they were not fluent, as we can see in the comment that I quoted. But this may be a generational difference, so reflecting the difference between their parents and themselves. So maybe the parents were less fluent than they are. And what we see basically are transferals from a first language speaker into their second language of small elements of their first language grammar and some elements of the first language phonology. So what we hope to go on to do is to increase the size of the corpus, and then that will allow us to study some of the more interesting features of the Daw's accent, which it is very clear. So it must be something to do probably with suprasegmental features, and to try and develop a more detailed understanding of the distributional patterns in the morphosyntax for things that we're not able to detect yet because the corpus is still fairly small. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. And here I have just a few references and a bit of bibliography relative to the topic.